We want to say a little bit about the ongoing issue with the Epstein files or things that are being released from investigative reports here regarding Donald Trump. And since the president is very litigious, I think important to say here that this is just emails that have been released from Jeffrey Epstein making certain allegations about President Donald Trump. Many believe them to be true. Some elements of them are disputed by the White House. So just want to note that at the outset here. But there's been the emails from Epstein that, and some of them have also involved other people. Like that's what's starting to happen as some of these are coming out. House Democrats started it. Republicans have released some of it. But I think the two big things that everyone is talking about, Rania, are the three emails. The one from Mr. Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell, where he was stating that Trump had spent a lot of time in his home and, was aware of certain facts about things that were going on there. As Epstein was certain things that he was convicted of course, as we know, in terms of underage women and girls. And then the other two to the author Michael Wolff, who people may remember is the guy who wrote those two tell-all books about Trump, essentially discussing, and the first email was, I think, in 2011, and these were in, I think, 2019, discussing the sort of revival of the allegations against Trump around Epstein, and Epstein stating very affirmatively that Trump was very aware of what took place, 100% aware, because he had actually asked Ghislaine Maxwell to stop. And I think that was, from what I can surmise, based on the information I have read, a reference to the potential trafficking, including of people like Virginia Jeffrey, at the Mar-a-Lago estate, which Trump apparently spoke to the Epstein camp about stopping because there were members who were complaining about their daughters and others being approached. So that is what everyone's talking about, sort of an extension of the long-term issue. It's become a major issue for Trump because, of course, he built up the Epstein files to such a huge degree as a sign of the deep state. And then as soon as he got in there, it seems like there's been quite a bait and switch. I think the sort of kernel of this, that amidst everything else, is really the biggest issue for Trump, is if he was aware, did he go to the authorities? And if he did not go to the authorities, then that would mean that he essentially was involved in, you could call it a cover up, looking the other way, but in serious crimes, and chose not to. Now, of course, we don't know. And I think this is why people are saying that more needs to be released to see what exactly he knew or did in relationship to information that Epstein is alleging that Trump had. And so I think we'll continue to see a back and forth around that as we move forward. But, a big potential political pitfall here for him, because yes, the issue is in and of itself explosive because the crimes that were committed by Epstein are obviously horrible crimes, but B, because Trump himself is the one who built this up as the litmus test for taking down the deep state. Like this is the thing that we're going to reveal when we get in there that shows how corrupt the government is. And many people, want to see government malfeasance and corruption rooted out. And I think that many of them, or there are a number of people who voted for Trump hoping that he would indeed uproot this so-called deep state and root out corruption and malfeasance in the government. And now I think it appears to many of them that he is not doing that and is acting just like other politicians in the past, which could mean a serious erosion of his support. And that going into the midterms could mean that he could lose support in Congress because people don't want to lose their seats because, MAGA people are upset about this, which means that his power, which is very much based on being more popular than all Republicans in Congress, could be at risk. And that could result in some serious political changes in the country if the number of Republicans start to go rogue in Congress.
Well, Eugene, where should I start from my end of things? I want to start with a video clip of Donald Trump today at a press conference, I believe, where he signed an executive order. It may have been one of amongst many executive orders. A few of them were actually designating Antifa a foreign terrorist organization, but he designated like a German group, an Italian group, and two Greek anarchist groups as foreign terrorist organizations. Yeah, they're all anarchist groups. But I guess that's his way of, continuing to go after Antifa. But he also said the following in a very short clip I want to play, which I found fascinating. John, can we bring up that clip?
Thank you. The Bible tells us that one of the measures of any society is how it cares for vulnerable children and orphans. So important, and it's so big in the Bible. So as we make America great again, we are going to protect American children in foster care.
So that's getting passed around the internet right now because it's like, wow, so you want to protect children. But I mean, these emails show that at the very least, Donald Trump, like most of our ruling elites, knew exactly what Jeffrey Epstein was doing, especially after the conviction, by the way. And that's what this trove of emails shows too. So we've got the Trump factor. And one thing I want to mention that I thought was really fascinating about this is when the New York Times was reporting about these, 22,000 emails that were dropped by the House Oversight Committee. And just to be clear, they weren't necessarily dropped in a searchable format. So it's actually quite hard to go through them, which is why you're seeing this like drip, drip, trickle of emails by people who are searching them one by one. Like they're not in a PDF format. So it's a bit difficult to go through them. So you're just seeing this trickle like over the past 24 hours. It's like this person emailing with Jeffrey Epstein, this person emailing with Jeffrey Epstein. But in 2015, so there's Michael Wolff, who was the journalist you mentioned, who had written those books about Trump. He was very much in contact with Jeffrey Epstein. And he was in some of these email exchanges, basically goading Jeffrey Epstein into like going after Trump. And in December 2015, it was the night of one of the Republican primary debates. And I'm reading from the New York Times. Mr. Wolff emailed Mr. Epstein and warned him that CNN was planning to ask Trump tonight about his relationship with you, either on air or in scrum afterwards. Mr. Epstein wrote back, if we were able to craft an answer for him, what do you think it should be? Mr. Wolff advised inaction, suggesting that Mr. Trump might try to deny a close relationship with Mr. Epstein. Quote, I think you should let him hang himself, he wrote of Mr. Trump. If he says he hasn't been on the plane or to the House, then that gives you a valuable PR and political currency that could be used to hang him later or save him, generating a debt. And I think that speaks to everything here when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein and who he was and what he was. This guy, I mean, and you see these emails coming out. Everyone was in touch with him, and this was after his conviction. After everybody knew, like there was no reason you could say you didn't know that Jeffrey Epstein was running a sex trafficking ring with underage girls. There's emails with Peter Thiel. There's emails with Larry Summers. There's this really creepy exchange with Tom Barrack, who's like sort of the Middle East envoy, ambassador to Turkey, who's been involved a lot with the negotiations, or, you know, in quotes, negotiations between the Lebanese side and the Israeli side, which is just forcing the Lebanese to like destroy their own country. But like the creepiest interaction. This is from one article laying it out that says basically Jeffrey Epstein told Tom Barrack to make me smile with pictures of Tom and a child. That's according to a 2016 email. And then he said, send photos of you and a child, make me smile. He then responded to an email back from Barack saying, photos look good. And it's unclear what child Epstein was referring to. But anyways, there's like that. There's also, you know, in 2011, Jeffrey Epstein received an email from an Emirati billionaire who basically advised Epstein that he could assist with providing shoes with GPS integration to track kids and clients. And Epstein responded with, thanks, great idea. I mean, that's so creepy. But again, it shows you the extent to which this guy was so freaking connected. The level of access is crazy. He had access to prime ministers, to the CEOs of all these major banks, to the CIA intelligence chief. And actually recently, you know, one thing that's really missing from a lot of the reporting we're seeing now, which has turned into this kind of like salacious embarrassment for Donald Trump and the Republican Party, and they're like trying to figure out how to deal with that. One thing that's missing from all this coverage is the fact that Jeffrey Epstein was very close to the Israeli intelligence agency, the Mossad. And Dropsite News has been doing a lot of reporting on this, and it's gotten really no mainstream attention. There's kind of been a blackout on that story. But basically, like we've already kind of talked about on this show, Jeffrey Epstein's relationship to Israel. I mean, after he was initially facing prosecution, he actually almost fled to Israel because, you know, if you are Jewish, you can like basically flee to Israel to like avoid being charged in the country that you're a citizen of or live in. Ghislaine Maxwell, who is his basically his pimp, who's now serving in like some basically minimum security prison and trying to get a commutation from Donald Trump, which is why people suspect she isn't saying how much Trump actually knew and is trying to say he knew nothing. Her father was basically a Mossad agent. More importantly, from what DropSite is reporting on these leaked emails that were kind of like leaked in this kind of back and forth leaking between the Iranians and Israelis, there's these interactions, many of which are between Jeffrey Epstein and former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak between 2013 and 2016, where they're basically working together on projects to promote Israeli tech partnerships around the world. And Jeffrey Epstein even helped basically broker a back channel between the Israelis and the Russians in Syria. Also helped broker a tech diplomacy or some sort of security deal, between Israel and Mongolia. Like, it just goes on and on and on. Basically helped former Israeli official Ehud Barak access these elites that he knew, like in Africa and across Asia and across the Middle East. He had an Israeli spy called Yoni Koren spending weeks at a time in his Manhattan home, who also had close ties to CIA Director Leon Panetta. So there's a lot of questions there about, who was serving who and what. But basically, this guy was tied to Israeli intelligence. So there's that's another angle of the story getting no attention. We'll see if more information about that comes out in this sort of trickle of discovery of these emails. And of course, there's a vote that's supposed to take place to release more of these emails. Trump is absolutely freaking out because it basically shows at the very least that he absolutely knew about this. Apparently, him and Jeffrey Epstein had some sort of falling out in the early 2000s. And interestingly enough, one of the things that Trump said is that falling out was due to the fact that one of the most high-profile victims of Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking, Virginia Giuffre, was working initially at the spa in Mar-a-Lago. And Trump was saying that Jeffrey Epstein had stolen her from his spa. It's all just this is just disgusting. This is gross. And, it really demonstrates that the ruling class in this country, and by the way, it's a bipartisan problem. Epstein was close to both Democrats and Republicans, but the ruling class in this country was perfectly fine. They just didn't give a shit. They did not care that Jeffrey Epstein was abusing mostly these working class, poor, underage girls who he was basically forcing into sex slavery. I should say that Virginia Giuffre has said that she never was forced to participate in any acts with Donald Trump. She's been pretty clear on that. So it's but what remains very clear is that Trump is lying. He absolutely did know. He was friends with this guy, but it's not just Donald Trump. And I'll also add that, Donald Trump was freaking out so much yesterday after this trove of documents came out that not only did he ignore every single question about Jeffrey Epstein during this bill signing he was doing. According to CNN, he basically dragged Pam Bondi, Todd Blanche, Kash Patel, and Lauren Boebert into an emergency meeting. And it said that he basically pressured Lauren Boebert to vote against releasing the Epstein files. So this has basically captivated the country. We're going to obviously be hearing much, much more about it. And I think the media is going to stick to the sort of salacious side of it rather than the fact that this is basically a huge condemnation, I think, of our entire ruling elite. And it includes the media. It even includes exchanges between a New York Times reporter and Jeffrey Epstein, where he's basically trying to help him. And he ultimately ended up losing his job. But the media is kind of complicit in this as well. Not kind of. The media is complicit in this as well. So anyways, just completely disgusting and disgraceful and says so much about the people that run American empire. They are it's full of either pedophiles or people who are totally fine enabling pedophilia as long as you can give them something in return. And that's what Jeffrey Epstein seems to have done. He seems to have cultivated these relationships with the financial and global elite. Everyone from, again, I'm talking prime ministers, presidents, intelligence chiefs, and the CEOs of major banks. He was able to cultivate those relationships, and then he was able to collect blackmail material on people to use as leverage, like he was saying he wanted to try to do with Donald Trump. And that's there's so much more. I think this is only the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing is we have to de-essentialize this from just Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, when you look at the history of the United States, and also the UK, I mean, there's ties to MI6 and others in there. There is a long history of overlap between criminal figures and the ruling class of the United States, because the biggest sort of hoax that's perpetrated on us is that quote unquote criminals, the mafia, the cartels, whoever, are some like sort of separate vertical of people, separate from other rich people. But the reality is that organized crime, quote unquote, is deeply intertwined and a part of the broader economy that exists. And in the context of the post World War II intelligence state, the CIA and other entities, the malign purposes that they have, gotten up to have often required them to make relationships, or not required them, they've chosen to make relationships with, quote unquote, organized crime figures to carry out things in the shadows that they don't want people to know that they are doing. But there is a long history of prominent criminals being deeply tied to the most important people. I mean, the person who comes to mind, of course, is Frank Costello, the so-called prime minister of the mafia, who could do anything for you in the 1950s and the early 1960s. You murdered somebody, you call him and he'll fix the case and make sure the police don't investigate, or that if they've investigated, the judge throws it out. Sort of immortalized, by the way, in The Godfather, the second Godfather, which is about quite a bit of this. I mean, it's not based on a true story per se, but people who've seen the movie, that there's the opening and there's that senator, and he is caught in a bed with a dead sex worker, and of course there is the mob attorney from the Corleone family, and he says, well, thankfully, Senator, my brother owns this hotel. And then, of course, they use that relationship in order to blackmail him in different ways. And I think that we've seen, obviously, the involvement of the mafia in the many different plots that were hatched against Cuba. We've seen different elements that have been alleged in different contexts and different pieces. But I think that's part of the problem that people don't fully understand, is that they're sort of shocked by these things. But in fact, what we can learn from, verified public historical information is that it's actually not that rare that there are high up criminal figures who are a big part of sort of the nexus of how power and money are moving in society, because they can play particular roles to do particular things that people either don't want to be known, don't want to be associated with, or are looking to have, some form of something that they want that they can then get from these people, whether it be, favors or sex or drugs or whatever it may be. And so I think it is, you're right, an indictment of the sort of broader system that has really, I think, skyrocketed in the post World War II era with the creation of these massive Western intelligence agencies trying to control the world, who I think have gone to great lengths to establish networks that involve many people doing many very bad things in order to carry out things that are also bad. So, it's something that's worth looking into. But when you start to look into it, it starts to get deep. You look at a guy like Johnny Roselli in the mafia, who is so deeply involved in Hollywood and the music industry and all these other factors that were there that people were using to manipulate certain, elements in different ways. So, and I don't want to say too much about it. I mean, I think that is sort of speaks for itself. I think a lot more is going to come out here. I mean, I think the Michael Wolff thing you pointed out is very interesting, as well as the New York Times. It seems Epstein was a very active source for many journalists, and that will be another interesting part of the story to watch.
Well, I was going to say Epstein offered a reporter photos of Donald and girls in bikinis in my kitchen, according to one of these email exchanges. So yeah, I mean, he just to go to what you were saying as a source, used as a source for the media. And again, this is after this guy was convicted. He was a convicted sex offender and still being taken seriously by the media, still being taken seriously in elite circles on both sides of the political spectrum. It's sick. And then there's Ghislaine Maxwell, who is getting literally right now, she's getting like special treatment. There's reports she's getting like endless supplies of as much toilet paper she wants. She gets access to the internet. People bring her like in time with people with computers so she can basically fill out her commutation form. And she's basically trying to say Trump had nothing to do with anything and didn't know anything. And it's obvious she's doing it so she can get a commutation. This is a convicted liar and sexual predator who destroyed people's lives. And these are people who talk all the time about how crime and we want to help save the children of America from criminals. You guys are criminals. But you know what? These are also people who are totally fine, carrying out a genocide in Gaza. And again, on both sides of the political spectrum. So of course, why would they care that somebody's a pedophile, a convicted pedophile? Who cares? Because everything at the end of the day is about power, about access, and about saving your own ass too. Because one thing that Jeffrey Epstein did is he collected information about the people that were with him. He recorded conversations. He kept a diary of who was on his quote unquote air fuck one. That's what he called it, which included a lot of people, including U.S. former presidents and princes from the UK, like Prince Andrew, and prime ministers from Israel. And also, he did all that as leverage and to protect himself from getting into trouble. And then in 2019, the guy supposedly commits suicide. I mean, nobody believes Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. The camera happened to be off. The security camera happened to just not be working. And the security guard happened to just fall asleep. And this guy who was apparently in good spirits the day before commits suicide when we know he has damning information about all of these elites who knew exactly what he was doing and either participated in cases or did not care. And yeah, like you said, indictment. And yes, is this new? No, there's probably so many stories like this we don't know about. There's a lot more about the Jeffrey Epstein stuff we don't know about. But it will be interesting to see how it impacts Donald Trump because, one thing that his base is all about is being against the pedophiles. But then somehow a lot of their leaders end up being pedophiles themselves. But, I think a lot of the MAGA people are saying this is a big conspiracy. Others are maybe a little bit disillusioned. But more importantly, it'll be interesting to see what happens in Congress as they release more. But then, it's also going to be used as a massive distraction because the U.S. is still, amassing forces in the Caribbean to potentially bomb Venezuela and doing all the other horrible things that U.S. empire does around the world while, be allowing insurance companies to basically raise our premiums to whatever the hell they want next year. So it, is also something to keep the American public, especially if they don't cover it the right way. If it stays in the sort of realm of just salacious embarrassment rather than the serious criminality of people who have a shit ton of power, then it's going to be just something that the media and, the elites of this country use to distract people in like a kind of reality TV sort of gossipy soap opera drama kind of way that doesn't really amount to anything.